I'm Len, and this is Straight Talk from the Homeland. This land, which is the first Christian nation, Armenia, has been fought over for centuries. The people here are indigenous to this land for thousands of years. Not more than a couple of kilometers from here is the beautiful Noravank Church, and only a few hundred meters from where I'm sitting is the RNE1 cave, which is 6,100 years old, world's oldest winery. I'm speaking to you here from the Homeland on this day because I'm actually quite concerned. Even though I'm not Armenian, I can see that the problems that beset Armenia are almost overwhelming people. People are not thinking straight, they're not listening, and they're not understanding basic international laws. I'm talking about Artsakh, of course. Some people call it Nagorno Karabakh. I do not, because that post-1994 is rather disrespectful in my view. Artsakh is the ancient name of that land, and Nagorno Karabakh happens to be the colonial invader's name. So I tend not to use Nagorno Karabakh unless it's in a historical context. I wanted to speak to you today about, well, the sort of things that Azerbaijan doesn't want you to know. Many people in Armenia and even in the diaspora don't know that the first time that Azerbaijan was an internationally recognized sovereign nation, 26 December 1991, at the fall of the Soviet Union. What Azerbaijan doesn't want you to know is that the first Azerbaijan entity, they called it a democratic republic, self-declared, which was formed from Tatar invaders, then calling themselves Azeris. This was never recognized. 1918 until 1920, this entity was never recognized. So it's much the same status as Artsakh'S today. And of course, you know that the Azerbaijan SSR was just a province of a federal nation, the USSR. Many of you know, of course, that the Artsakh authorities exited the Soviet Union legally under Article 72 of the Soviet Constitution. But what does that mean? What does it mean for the status of Artsakh? Well, it means that Artsakh fulfilled all the obligations to become a free and independent nation. Exactly the same legislation was used by Armenia and was used by Azerbaijan to declare independence. The difference being that Armenians seemed to be unable to communicate to the world that Artsakh had the same rights as Armenia and Azerbaijan did. What did the world do? The world simply assumed that the provincial boundaries, which were now null and void, no longer legal after the fall of the Soviet Union, represented exactly the same boundaries as the new Azerbaijan sovereign nation. Well, I can tell you there's many examples in the world where the provincial boundaries, for example, you look at the former Yugoslav boundaries, do not now equal the same boundaries as the boundaries recognized internationally for the new countries that emerged, Croatia, Serbia. There's even one new country which is only partially recognized, but at least by more than 120 nations, called Kosovo. This was never even a province in Yugoslavia, yet Turkey recognizes it because it's majority Muslim nation, I presume. You see, when a federal nation breaks up like the USSR, it becomes a clean sheet. Under the ICCPR, which is an international convention, the rights of self-determination become paramount. They therefore don't go against the concept of territorial integrity. And indeed, that's exactly the status of Artsakh right now. Artsakh's status as an independent nation, unrecognized, does not contradict the concept of Azerbaijan's territorial integrity, because the territorial integrity of any sovereign nation has to fulfill four features. The first being that you control the people within the territory that you are sovereign over. And this was certainly not the case before 1994. It was certainly not the case after 1994. You need to fulfill the requirement of controlling the boundaries of your sovereign nation. You need to be not controlled by another entity. This is called Westphalian sovereignty. So in the case of the SSR, Baku wasn't sovereign because it was controlled by Moscow. Neither was the Armenian SSR, for that matter. So Artsakh fulfilled all three of those requirements. It controlled its boundary after 1994. It controlled its people with governance, democratic governance, I might add, as opposed to the Azeri model of dictatorship. It wasn't governed by any other nation. And the fourth element, the only element due to political reasons that isn't fulfilled, is recognition by other nations. And the reason for that? Well, simply speaking, I don't believe that Armenians have raised their voice clearly enough. And one of those reasons is because the people generally think that Azerbaijan has some measure of recognition over the area, so therefore Artsakh must have what we call remedial secession. This is not an international law, by the way. People that talk about remedial secession talk about it in terms of a concept, and it was used, of course, for Kosovo. You know, the reality is today, with war in Ukraine and talk of separatism and all of that sort of thing, territorial integrity of Ukraine, there's no politician in the West that's going to be jumping up and recognizing Artsakh if they think for a moment that Artsakh is part of Azerbaijan. They're not going to do it unless there's an almighty genocide and the West is forced to act. And sometimes we see the West is very slow. They're not going to do anything. People that talk about remedial secession don't understand that the message, the clear message that needs to be given to the world is that Artsakh was never part of a new nation called Azerbaijan, first formed in 26 December 1991. Therefore, it has nothing to do with the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan, nothing whatsoever. I even heard some people talking about remedial sovereignty. You know, you can talk about all sorts of vague legal concepts, none of which, by the way, are in international law. I'm talking about international conventions recognized by the United Nations, an organization I used to work for. All you're going to do is confuse people with talk like that. Artsakh needs clear messages. It's never been part of a sovereign Azerbaijan, not between 1918 and 1920. Actually, the reason that Azerbaijan Democratic Republic 1918 to 20 was never recognized was because both the League of Nations and powerful nations like the United States at the time stated that Azerbaijan's boundaries were in dispute. So, ironically, for the very reason that Azerbaijan was busy claiming places like Sunik, Artsakh, for the very reason it was claiming that, and their boundaries were unclear at the time, that was the reason why Azerbaijan wasn't recognized. So that's rather ironical. But to my point, 1918 to 1920, Azerbaijan was not sovereign. Post-1920, subsumed within the USSR as a province, not sovereign. 1991, becomes sovereign, but before that, Artsakh has already legally left. So I ask the question, why is there no clarity from successive governments, not just this Armenian government, on this very point? Why is it that the world doesn't seem to understand that Artsakh has the automatic right to self-determination under the ICCPR? Automatic. But it was never automatically granted. Why? Because Armenians don't seem to be able to speak in a united voice. So I'm talking to you from the homeland, from here in RNE, and I'm asking you, we need to stop this divisive talk. We need to message our politicians, our leaders, representatives around the world. They don't want to talk about any separatism or remedial secession or anything that sounds like it's a big decision that they need to make, which separates Artsakh from Azerbaijan. You need to talk clearly to people. Artsakh was never part of Azerbaijan. That's the end of it. And the remedial part of it, that comes from reparations for 3 illegal invasions. 1920, Shushi, 20,000 people murdered by the Azeris to try and ethnically cleanse the Armenians from that part. 1988 through 1994, war crimes, murders. Khojaly, which by the way was committed by Azeris themselves, not at Khojaly, but in a place near Agdam. So it should be called the Agdam massacre. And now, most recently, in 2020, where almost 5,000 young Armenians and also civilians lost their lives defending that nation. Why is it that people can't clearly educate their leaders that this place, Artsakh, was illegally invaded 3 times and actually requires reparations from the enemy for what the enemy has been doing, a continuation of the Armenian genocide, which by the way started in 1064. So in summary, I've done a lot of talking. I want to be very positive. I have moved here from Australia with my wife, Armene. And I see a great potential in this land, but it frustrates me that people don't talk straight like I'm talking. Yes, it might upset people, but I have a message for the people in government. You need to talk clearly to the people here, not in poetry as I often hear. People are frightened. People need to be reassured that Artsakh, an ancient land which has been there for centuries, centuries before the Azeris came, will be there for centuries more to come. They need to be reassured that the ancient Armenian culture and heritage, which we're trying to preserve here in RNE, are going to be there forever and not erased by this genocidal neighbour, or neighbours I should say. I look forward to discussing in our next edition of Straight Talk from the Homeland. Thank you.